And good evening and welcome to tonight's order paper. And I think you'd love our panel on tonight. We've got our good old famous Laura, all the way from Huhana. And we've got Huhana Hickey, who, now, I know your electorate is Tamaki Makaurau on the Māori roll, but which general electorate are you coming live from?
Papatui Otara area. So I'm not sure exactly, but it'll be the Papatui, one of the in that catchment. So it's Salisa.
Okay. Oh, well, that's good to know, since we always like to know which electorate our viewers, not our viewers, our panelists are in, because, you know, they're coming from all sorts of various different parts of the country.
Well, I think too, South Auckland. So I'm representing Southside tonight. I hope I don't let them down, eh?
well, considering, but yes, remember, we're more south of the Bombays.
Oh, well, there you go. You've got to have someone north of the Bombays. I mean, how are you ever going to know Auckland otherwise, eh?
Well, exactly. And I mean, currently there's war to try and get rid of my electorate because people don't like my local MP, Julian Genter.
Oh, she's not too bad.
Oh, yes, but these are people who think anything green, you must be loony for simply being in the Greens. Probably no logic behind it.
We could say the same around the right too and have a little argument there, but you know, there's good and bad in every side. But
Epsom and Auckland Central were tossed up as two potential Auckland electorates to disappear.
Well, that wouldn't be a bad thing.
I'm not against that.
No, I'm all for that. Let's have that happen.
Yeah, so it's interesting with what's coming out from the representation review. So for those who are wondering, tonight's show will be covering the mental health bill, which will be our first one, and then we will be covering the resource management, freshwater and other amendment bill, where there's a nice lovely bit section at the start of it.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to be needing that mental health bill after going through the resource management amendment bill. That is just wild what the government has done there.
Yeah. Basically, it's a big time overreach. I mean, I'm just waiting for which is the next council they're going to sit there and step into. I mean, is it going to be Hamilton? Is it going to be Lower Hutt? Is it going to be Poiroa? I mean, I think their sewage treatment plants still don't have a resource consent. Who knows?
Free Waters, you know, we've now gone back to the councils not being able to afford to upgrade their infrastructure.
And at the same time, naughty Wellington for having too much debt and simultaneously not using enough debt at the same time.
Oh, I hate it. Schrodinger's debt. I hate it when that happens.
I wouldn't know.
If you know anyone who wants to do a judicial review on Simeon Brown's intervention, I think it is needed, because there's a lot of things in there that just make absolutely no sense. And it's like, basically, it's like, I'm not sure what the purpose of this intervention is, but you've told us two different messages.
Well, judicial review, I think that there's calls for a judicial review on a few things at the moment. I think they're going to be a little busy, and the lawyers are really going to make money, other than me, who does human rights work where there is no money at the moment. But if you want to fight the government, there's a few busy lawyers out there.
And there is a bill called the District Court Judge Amendment Bill that increased the number of district court judges by one. And maybe we actually should put in there, I think one is not enough. I think we probably need to increase it by 25 to 35 full-time equivalents with the amount of potential judicial reviews that are on the card by this current government.
Put 3 zeros behind that one.
We're building more prisons too, so it stands to reason we need to increase the judges.
Yeah. And now let's get to our more fun bit, considering before we get to the real nitty-gritty.
House that the seat of Darlene Tana became vacant by application of section 55(1) FA and 55A of the Electoral Act 1993 on the 22nd of October 2024. This is a serious matter and the first time that the provisions inserted into the Electoral Act by way of amendment in 2018 have been used to declare a seat vacant. It's not a matter that I've taken lightly since it affects the composition of the House. I've taken advice and carefully considered the law. I'm satisfied that the motion delivered to me by the parliamentary leaders of the Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand, complies with section 55C of the Electoral Act 1993 and is accompanied by a statement that meets the requirements of section 55D of that Act. Accordingly, I've given notice that the seat has become vacant. Members, I've received a letter from Willow Chen Prime seeking to debate Understanding Order 399, the government's efforts to end a protest at a youth justice residence. This is a particular case of recent occurrence for which there is ministerial responsibility. However, it does not reach the threshold of being urgent enough to warrant setting aside the business of the House today. The application is declined. Petitions have been...
So I think that's our more somewhat serious, light-hearted thing to start off with. I personally thought Darlene Tana was going to turn up to the chamber, be told that she's been booted out, and then be dragged out by the Sergeant of Arms. I'm bitterly disappointed.
Apparently she was pretty relieved to go, from what I heard.
Is that what she told Mikey Sherman?
Oh, God. His story changes all the time.
I'm just glad it's over.
Yeah.
I mean, I was worried about that. This kind of issue needs to be handled immediately and not grow legs. And I'm kind of glad that she's now gone.
On the good side, I will say, is there's been a rule book somewhat established on what is the right way to do it. Even though I do think the way the Greens have done it have dragged out a lot longer than it could have been. But I do believe that they've put all the checks and balances in place that if it is challenged in the courts, it's not likely to stack up in Darlene's favour.
I think the reality there is that, they needed to... they're in a rock and a hard place. They didn't really want the Walker Act to be there in the first place, but then they were the ones that had to use it. And it's kind of a difficult position to be in. So you've got these newer MPs that weren't against the Walker Act when it came in, and they're there now, and people change and politicians change. And it was an appropriate use at an appropriate time. So I think it sets precedent, really. And I'm glad
circumstances also change as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad that she retained her own dignity and not needing to be hauled out fighting and screaming. We don't need any more of that kind of drama. Parliament's dramatic enough at the moment.
Yeah. We actually had a situation where an MP was dragged out by the Sergeant of Arms since we've had cameras in Parliament.
I don't know. I'm sure Muldoon's times were pretty freaky. I mean, I was a teenager watching it and through a teen's eyes, and it was pretty freaky back then. So I wonder if cameras coming in place has actually made them behave a little better, but I doubt it. I'm not seeing grown-ups these days in Parliament.
Yeah.
Kindergarten all over again.
I don't have a crab rave. I don't have a crab rave for the occasion, but I got a cat rave.
Well, you know, they're eating all the cat. Oh, no, sorry.
No, we don't do that.
Wrong country.
Gosh, have you got things to say, Mr. Biggie?
Okay, let's kick off with Matt Ducey's opening legislative statement for the his bill, the Mental Health Bill. Let's kick it off.
3.
Mental Health Bill, first reading.
Speaker.
Honourable Matt Ducey.
I present a legislative statement on the Mental Health Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website. Honourable Matt Ducey.
I move that the Mental Health Bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Health Committee to consider the bill. Madam Speaker, it is a serious step when the state intervenes and takes control of your life. The current Mental Health Act has been criticised for not being aligned with the dominant models of mental health care in New Zealand. This bill is needed to ensure we have modern compulsory mental health care legislation. People who are subject to the legislation come from all walks of life. They could be a family member, a friend, neighbour or a professional or leader in our communities. These are everyday New Zealanders experiencing mental distress at a level requiring state intervention to support their recovery. It is important that the bill comes in today with full support across all political parties in Parliament. As New Zealand's first mental health minister, it is important to me that Parliament takes a bipartisan approach to addressing mental health in New Zealand. This builds on the kaupapa, started with Chloe Swarbrick, Lewissa Wall and myself 5 years ago when we first met to set up New Zealand Parliament's first cross-party mental health group to develop long-term policy solutions irrespective of 3-year parliamentary cycles. It is important to see this bipartisan approach to mental health continue to thrive here tonight. Madam Speaker, can I start by acknowledging those with lived experience, specifically those who have lived experience with compulsory mental health care in New Zealand. I do hope that you will see your voices, your stories in this bill. We need to do better. I want to thank you for sharing your experiences to date, and I'd like to encourage those who are still to share their story to make a submission in the Select Committee process so we can ensure those with lived experience are heard. I'd also like to acknowledge those who bravely came forward to share their stories in the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historical Abuse in State Care and in the care of faith-based institutions. For some, talking about compulsory mental health care will be difficult. It is important to state that this bill will contribute to at least 10 of the abuse and care recommendations relating primarily to care safety and monitoring. My vision is an effective and comprehensive mental health and addiction continuum that puts people at the centre of their care. Making sure we have legislation that can support people who are experiencing the most acute mental distress is a key part of that continuum. That is what we are here for today. Back in 2018, there was a government inquiry into mental health and addiction. The resulting report, Hayata Oranga, recognised that the Mental Health Act was out of date. The report recommended new legislation that reflects a human rights-based approach, promotes supported decision-making, aligns with the recovery and wellbeing model of mental health, and provides measures to minimise compulsory or coercive treatment. In 2021, the current Act was amended, which, as I said at the time, it was an important step in addressing that Hayata Oranga recommendations, but ultimately a small step. I'm very pleased to be taking the next major step by introducing this bill to the House. This bill will modernise compulsory mental health care in New Zealand. The current Act has received substantial criticism and challenges both domestically and internationally. That includes what we heard through the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historical Abuse in State Care and the care of faith-based institutions. Many of those 2,400 survivors who courageously shared their stories and their experiences with the government and the public spent time in mental health facilities. This bill forms part of the government's response to the recommendations of the inquiry's final report, particularly those recommendations relating to care safety. This bill supports a future focus on safe and effective mental health care for people that require state intervention. This bill will be a critical safety net for those experiencing severe mental distress who are unable to engage in decision-making about their own mental health care. It is intended to be used as a last resort only. When this happens, a person is required to receive care either in the community or, if that is not appropriate, in an inpatient setting such as a hospital. This does not cover all specialist mental health service users. In fact, only around 6.4% of service users are subject to the Mental Health Act at any given time. But that is still over 11,000 Kiwis, people receiving compulsory care either in the community or in a hospital setting. I know that for those experiencing the most severe mental distress, compulsory care can have a significant impact on their lives and their loved ones. It can be a lifelong influence on people's ability to live independently and engage productively in their communities. I want to highlight the three big shifts I expect to see under this bill. Firstly, this bill is about providing more effective care. Compulsory mental health care is not a new concept, but how it is delivered is out of date and no longer represents current best practice. The legislation will support care being delivered in a way that minimises coercion and is responsive to individual needs. This will bring compulsory care in line with modern clinical practice in New Zealand. Placing a person at the centre of their care will also support safer ways of working, which will improve outcomes for people under the legislation, their families and communities. Secondly, the bill will recognise people's decision-making capacity. This is why one of the most significant aspects of the bill is its approach to embedding supported decision-making. At its core, this is about putting measures in place so that people can be actively involved and assisted to make decisions about their own mental health care. You will see that the bill has measures in place to support people before they become unwell, such as through compulsory care directives. It also includes key protections when people are under the legislation, such as duties to ensure participation. Empowering individuals is fundamental to this bill. Thirdly, the bill introduces far greater protections and safeguards. The bill will ensure people understand what is happening to them and why they're entitled and what they're entitled to when they are under the legislation. One of the aspects I'm particularly pleased to be speaking to are new independent support and advocacy roles under this bill. These roles will be critical to ensuring people have the support they need to be heard, as well as to understand and exercise their rights. People will also have more opportunities to have the decisions about them reviewed and more opportunities to exit the legislation if no longer needed. We also take a hard look at restricted practices, specifically the use of seclusion. This bill ensures there will be far greater monitoring and oversight. I recognise that there are a number of practices like these marred in history of inappropriate use, abuse and overuse. I am committed to seeing the reduction and elimination of seclusion over time. The bill has mechanisms to support far stricter use with the ability to prohibit seclusion once the system is ready. I'm sure restricted practices will be a critical topic of discussion and of high importance to submitters and the Select Committee. This bill has been driven, Madam Speaker, by the voice of New Zealanders, and I would take some time to thank all the individuals, the families, the organisations and others in the mental health sector who have shared their time and experiences through the public consultation process on the policy underpinning the bill back in 2021. I acknowledge there are diverse views on this piece of legislation and that people have engaged in this work in good faith. Developing this bill has involved carefully balancing all of those views. I have people who took part in the consultation look at the bill and see how all the different views have been considered. I hope this good faith engagement can continue across the House as the bill proceeds to the Health Committee and beyond. I commend this bill to the House.
Right. Like I said last time, Matt Ducey is my favourite bald guy in the National Party out of all the bald guys they've got. It's a shame that he's kind of going head to head against the other bald guy who doesn't seem that interested in mental health funding. But I'm glad that Matt Ducey is taking the report He Ara Oranga seriously, which is really refreshing to see from this coalition. So, credit where credit is due for this guy. Yep.
I agree, actually. I give him credit for having the passion for this bill because I seldom see that in health and wellbeing or disability-related policies coming forward when it's under this government. However, in this case, it has been, but this started well before this coalition got in. Everything's been there. I was on the. I'm sitting on the Law Commission advisory around the supported decision-making stuff, and something I've had a personal passion about. The one thing I found interesting is, did you put that on fast forward, or does he just?
Yes, yeah. So that was at 1.5 times speed. Otherwise, we'll be here all night long.
Well, I was wondering that. It was actually nice that it got through a lot quicker, but I thought I was starting to listen to a chipmunk. So just a little worried on that one. But coming back to the mental health bill, it's something I've had a real passion about. I was part of Justice Action Group, Colin Bergering, when we had Alistair that was autistic in the isolation for a number of years. And now he's in his own home with carers and he's happy. He's not lying on a mattress with nothing else there.
Was that the one that was at Poirua?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, if I remember the place. I'm hopeless on remembering those kind of details, but I remember the context. And this is not unusual when it comes to certain groups that are marginalised even within the Mental Health Act. So this bill was aiming to go from substituted decision-making to supported decision-making, which was in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD, and particularly around Article 12. So I was an Indigenous advisor with Auntie Gail Rankin from Australia at that time when we were making these decisions. There was a huge fight with countries, especially around restraint, around rights of a person who has a mental health condition, or as they were calling it, psychosocial. They don't call it mental health in that arena. And the reason they do that, it takes it out of this concept we have around mental health and well-being, loony bins and all of those things. But by calling it psychosocial, it actually starts to shift the thinking away from the negative stereotypes into something more that we can understand. But for me, I think there's some good stuff in trying to look at reducing coercion in mental health treatment. As a lawyer for Auckland Disability Law in 2008, I remember having several clients that were under compulsory treatment ringing me to say that they were in hiding until the compulsory order goes away, reminding them that the order doesn't go away. They just got to find them and they'll enforce it. And it concerns me. Even though people say, well, isn't it better to be well than to be sick? The whole discussion around capacity at the UN was actually from people with psychosocial conditions saying, I have the right to stay unwell if I choose to. And they also have the consequences of making that choice. But for governments, for us, we all think, well, we should put these people under compulsory treatment. Why? Who does it benefit? And what do we call a mental health condition these days? Being gay was mental health once. Being who I am was mental health once, where they were allowed to convert us illegally. Being transgendered was mental health once. It's not. It's no longer. It's now recognised.
I mean, in Saudi Arabia, you can still get the death penalty for it.
Yep.
Well, you can for being gay, but apparently in some of the Muslim states, if you get the operation, you are fully accepted as a trans person because you're deemed as a woman. So
yes, Iran does that.
Yes. And it's quite contradictory when you get authoritarian regimes that go one way and then they have this variation within that regime. But that's evident everywhere. But the supported decision-making stuff is really important too. Where once someone was excluded from handling their own money and stuff, we've got several nieces, nephews and mokos who are autistic to certain degrees. And one can't handle money, but he's capable of working. So, the balance of that stuff. But he has the right to make a decision on what he wants his money spent on. And they have that right to have a say in how they want things. And they have the right to get married. They have the right to have children. They have the right to live their lives. The guardian can only be there if that causes a problem. And supported decision-making is walking beside them rather than making the decision for them. The other is restraint treatment, which is hugely problematic. I think the main issue is, like, you can implement all the recommendations are good recommendations, but it comes down to resourcing and it comes down to staffing. And what are we seeing at the moment? Redundancies, people losing their jobs. We're seeing job cuts. They put money into mental health, but they gave $24 million to Mike King, $3 a child, really. And that doesn't really do the systemic change that we need. On the board of Odyssey House, we deal with alcohol and drug. We deal with a lot of those stuff that also comes into mental health. We need staff. We need the people to be well-resourced, and we need mental health to be well-resourced. Without both those things, we're going to keep struggling.
Now, just want to ask you on something here. Now, you probably know about Makaire Sydney in Tauranga who got elected from a coma.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
But
I did hear there were that we're looking at possibilities to see if a next of kin could potentially, what was it called?
Give assent?
No, resign on his behalf. I got asked, well, what happens in that situation? I said, I don't think a doctor would sit there and deem him incapacitated to that stage to do it at this point in the process.
Well, you cannot let that person, there can be no decision made if they can't give consent. They haven't resigned, so they can't give consent to resigning.
Exactly.
And they have time and the right to be able to choose once they are capable again, if they are.
Well, and that was the thing there was, because it was like, it was something that got brought up was, well, can they do this? Can this not? I said, for that step to take place, I doubt a doctor would sign it off literally the moment the election day occurred. Like, that sort of thing. But that was something that went around there with McCarthy Sydney, was the fact that because he had brilliant, excellent health during the campaign and then had health needs that basically put him into a coma right between, if you look between the It's in the Ballot show and election day, it was just like, what the hell happened? And yeah, that was something that actually got brought up in there. But yeah, there was something that was said there. Can a parent go, no, sorry, he's not able to take the seat. Can you take the next person off the list? Which, no, you wouldn't be able to do that under the Electoral Act.
No, you'd have to really require more information. You need the doctors to give the evidence that this person would be incapable of coming right, of ever gaining conscious and being able to be in that role. You actually have to go. It's not as straightforward as saying, oh, we'll get the rally to sign it and get him off the roll. It's actually a bit more complex than that. Yeah. But that's incredible that they had that discussion.
And I got asked questions. I wouldn't say this was coming from the councillors. I think this was coming from inside the family, because I think they were in a I don't know what to do situation.
Oh, fair enough. But don't preempt it. Don't rush it.
I mean, put it this way. It's the first time someone has been elected but unable to be sworn in New Zealand history for both central and local government politics, probably that we could remember.
I haven't heard of it at all. It's a scenario and it's happened, so there's a procedure in place for when it does.
Well, they had one for what happens if someone dies during between nomination day and election day, known as the Port Waikato by-election.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, let's move on to Ingrid Leary for her speech in support.
Anybody who has interfaced with the Mental Health Act 1992 will know the trauma and the difficulty in grappling with really big issues around human rights, dealing with loved ones, dealing with crisis, dealing with safety. And as somebody who has used Section 12 of that Act twice on family members and had extensive experience with family members who have experienced mental health, I want to acknowledge that this is a very big and serious and important piece of legislation. And it is complex. It is always going to be contentious in some elements, and I want to congratulate the Minister for bringing it to the House, for building on the work that the Labor government did in getting it here. And I also want to thank him for his collaborative approach, for reaching out and providing us with a pre-reading briefing. We take on board his invitation to suggest at the Select Committee that we go around the regions and seek input from New Zealanders. It's certainly something I would support. And I also heard in his briefing the flexibility of the Minister to consider some of the more contentious elements. The bill does go a long way in terms of moving the 1992 current law from a very sort of bright line situation where people are either deemed requiring compulsory care or not into a much more nuanced approach. And so I'm not going to go into the differences. I think others can speak to them. But I'd like to just lay out some of the things that we would be very interested in as opposition to hear from submitters. We are cautious about certain areas of it. There is a change to the threshold that requires people to be kept under compulsory care. In some ways it looks to have been broadened, which could be concerning, but we also see that it is proportionate. There is a proportionality test, and so I'd be really keen to hear from people, especially those with lived experience and those working in the sector, as to what they see the impact of that would be. We are very concerned about electroconvulsive therapy, and for this reason, we will support the bill to the first reading in its current form. I have heard the Minister say in the briefing and tonight in the House that he is flexible about this, and our concerns come about because of our sensitivity to the evidence and the recommendations from the Royal Commission into Abuse and Care. We need to now temper that with the pre-consultation that happened before this bill came up, and I'm hearing that the Minister may be flexible. But we do also have real concerns around the use of ECT that is still allowed under the Act for under 18-year-olds in certain situations, and we want to hear more about what the appropriate consenting process should be and what the safeguards are. The Minister has mentioned seclusion. Our concern here is we understand there are workforce pressures, but we also feel that to use a pragmatic reason to override on human rights as the sole reason is problematic, and so we want to see what can be done around seclusion to strengthen the human rights element and ensure that it is used only in the rarest of circumstances. And the same probably applies to the other treatments that the Minister referred to. In general, I think the bill will be much stronger if we can just ensure that there is greater compliance, and that is because the policy statement refers to a level of compliance needed to achieve its objectives as being very high, and also specifically and the need to secure efforts to secure compliance. Now, those are things that I'm sure can be done through some panel beating of the legislation, and again, Labor will be really listening hard to see where we can strengthen that. It will be around the reporting requirements afterwards, I imagine, after certain powers have been used under the Act, but also in the processes that are used to evaluate people, so that we can be sure that we are really fine-tuning the balance of making sure we take the best care of people when they're in crisis and they need to be kept in a safe environment, not necessarily with their consent, and that they get the care and support afterwards that they need. So with those caveats, Madam Speaker, we do support this to first reading, and I look forward to the many submissions that we will get.
Ricardo Menendez.
God, she was quick. I love the reference to panel beating being mentioned on there. To me, panel beating is about fixing a car body, not fixing or amending a piece of legislation. So it does feel a bit like a very mainstream title for something that isn't a bill, isn't what the average person deals with.
Well, I thought it was about panel beating. My body probably needs more panel beating than the bill. But, you know, I hear what they're saying, and I do actually support updating the bill, the Act. It's an old piece of legislation. My big concern, I noticed Ingrid talked about it, was actually the issue around children and young people and the issue of restraint. That's a huge issue, particularly around the growth of knowledge around autism, ADHD. And we actually do have a muko that's in that level of very aggressive kind of behaviours. And, you know, the police are now involved, and it gets to a point where there's violence against a parent or parents, siblings. What do? Do we chemically restrain them? Do we physically restrain them? There are ways of handling it, but it takes a lot of skill. And unfortunately, we're losing those skills to Australia, to overseas generally. And it takes a very deep understanding of cognitive behavioural conditions that run into mental health conditions and how to deal with them. I mean, I used to go to Te Koa Health here quite a bit, the mental health unit here at Manukau, and it was interesting because I go into forensics. Staff would go, do you need security? I never did, because it all comes down to how you validate a person when they're in that state of mind, and just being calm, sitting. And I've never been attacked by any client that is in a psychotic state, and I have sat with many of them. One of the things is that maybe under stress, staff underpaid, staff too short of staff numbers, it creates a risk. And I am concerned that that risk will end up causing further abuse. When we look at institutional care and disabled people and the abuse inquiry, which Matt mentioned, we've got 80% of disabled have experienced some kind of abuse. It's probably higher, but those are the numbers that we've found that came forward. This is not going to end abuse for anybody, and there's no mention of that in the Act about how they will protect the person. Rather, it's about how society can be safe, how staff can be safe. But what about the individual who is at the centre of this? I mean, I remember days, my teen years, when I got restrained after a court case where I was raped, and he was found guilty, but I ended up in psych. And I remember as a teenager, they physically held me down and beat me. And that's what they did back then. This is 1979, 1977. They did that sort of thing. It won't end unless we put within the legislation a way of protecting those clients.
And actually, there are some people who think that's the right way of the approach. And there are some people, and Sean Plunkett is one who does this. Apparently, Tory Whanau, who's ADHD, is the one there, make it out like it's some diagnosis of convenience, not the fact that it was possibly unknown for a very long time and has only, because she's hit a certain point, she's actually gone and seeked it. But some people, when you get having something downplayed, they don't seek treatment, and then they end up in situations where they have a shock diagnosis, 25, 30 years later than they should have been. I mean, Anne Hickey from The Chase was one who didn't know about an autism diagnosis until I think it would be about 15 years ago, which would have been before she went on The Chase. And
women are underdiagnosed. Women are very underdiagnosed with ADHD and autism. And I have a problem with self-diagnosis. I do believe it needs to be a proper diagnosis, but a woman do present differently. You know, you can always tell an ADHD boy, I can tell the difference between ADD and ADHD. Hyperactive, runs around the place, runs circles around you and just about want to strangle them. But a girl with ADHD doesn't present in the same way, and they often hide the symptoms because they're taught to, because society tells you a girl behaves in a certain way. We expect the boys to be puppy dog tails and, you know, snails and whatever that is, and girls are sugar and spice and all things nice. We don't expect them to be the same. Yeah, exactly. You know, we have these images and stereotypes. Unfortunately, it delays diagnosis. And diagnosis is important for someone to understand. I mean, I'm ADHD. I don't take medication. I don't make it as an excuse for anything, but I call it a superpower. Tori is a very ADHD woman. I can see it a mile off. But she's a good leader, and that diversity can actually work in her favour if people would give her a chance. She's a good mayor. She inherited billions of debt. She inherited an aging infrastructure. It's not her fault.
No.
It's only been in place 2 years. Give her a chance.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, whereas everyone's been trying to take her down. Since the moment she's been elected, like they tried to take down Andy Foster the moment he got elected, that they were trying to take Justin Lester down the moment he got elected, that they were trying to take Celia Wade Brown because they were upset with the island-based cycle lane.
Before we move on to the next point, Dr. Eric has posted a comment that I disagree with. So he's referring to Harry Tam's Hard to Reach program. I have extended members of my family that have been in and out of gangs. And what Harry Tam is doing is reaching out to hard to reach Māori people to help them come out of the gangs and to prevent them from going to prison by taking much more healthier approaches to mental health. So, you know, this idea that, okay, yeah, Harry Tam, you know, he's an ex-member of the Mongrel Mob, therefore he's giving out meth. Or it's like, no, that's not how that program is working. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Huhana, but yeah, I've got a real problem with the way how that's been written.
I understand where most people are thinking on that issue, but I would rather Harry Tam be doing a program than Destiny Church. But I don't care who does it. If it stops people with drugs, you know, all good. We can deal with the other issues of them being indoctrinated by a cult or whatever later. But gangs are a reality. They exist. I mean, I didn't grow up with gangs, don't get me wrong, but, you know, I've got whānau. I was adopted into a different kind of family. But when I went back home, found my marae and everything else, I saw patches at Tangi and stuff. And you know what? They behaved appropriately. There was never an issue. In my public service working with gangs, I've never had an issue with any of them. Lay down my boundaries, but show respect, and it gets shown back. We've had a neighbour that protected us multiple times in one of our streets once, ex-gang. And, you know, they're people, they're human. As a kaitaka wainga, which is a listener for the Royal Abuse Inquiry, I can tell you now, I have listened to the abuse stories. As a lawyer, I gather the affidavits. And one of the ones that breaks my heart every single time are those who are in the gangs who are telling me what was done to them as 5-year-olds, what was done to them on those bloody boot camps that people are reviving, what was done to them as children, some of the older ones, Borstal, all of those places. Mate, I got 20 disabled prisoners out of Waikeria prison one time. I got them all out. You know, one has reoffended in 20 years. Why? Because I set up a release program in the community so when they got out, they could be released and they'll never have to go back if they can, you know, get that support. I had a young man who gets used by gangs all the time, but he's got no frontal lobe. He's damaged from his parents that were drug addicts when they were 16. Now they're respectable, but he is dealing with all of that. And, you know, he goes in and out of prison. He's harmless. He's a fraudster. But they use it for, you know, the gangs use him, but he's not caught up in the gangs. There's all sorts of people that are in there that don't need prison. We need therapy. If you want to get real about mental health, I'll tell you now, we get real by having a therapeutic approach. We look at the Scandinavian countries, closing prisons because they applied a therapeutic, humane approach. Anyone is capable of ending up in prison for a crime. Anybody. What we need to do is realize that these are people we rehabilitate and get them back out, not to go back in. And the only way to do that, give them dignity, housing, give them a job, give them enough, as Michael Joseph Savage once said, and Norm Kirk said the same thing. You give someone enough money to live on, to have a house, to have a job, to have a home, and a little bit more money to be able to enjoy life with their family. People are happy. When you put restrictions, benefit restrictions on people, the increase in crime is happening. Why?
Yeah.
What about that guy that stabbed that woman the other day? I'm hearing arguments all around me because where I live, it is a place that has hotbeds of poverty. Okay? I'm hearing them fighting. We had neighbours fighting. I have to call the cops. I don't like calling them, but I have to for the sake of the babies I'm hearing at the same time. You want to reduce that? That wasn't happening 2 years ago. People were trying to get on. South Auckland is a strong region, but we struggle under poverty and growing poverty. And that is the problem we have. You want to break the cycle. You want to break the gang cycles. The only way you can do that is work with the families, work with their women, work with their children. And
help them leave.
And don't force the children. I know a young woman, when we were doing the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, we went round. When we went round and talked to people, and one was a young child or a young adult, but a daughter of a gang leader. As a result, she wanted to be a cop and she wanted to change the cycle. And they denied her the right to go and do that job because she's the daughter of a gang leader. Now, why? These people want to change things in the same way, that you and I want to make changes.
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend sorry to interrupt, but I've also got a friend.
Go for
it.
Lost your sound, Laura. We got you back.
No, we've got a visual, but no.
You've got a visual. We can't hear you. I don't know what's happening. Well, on this whole issue, I absolutely agree. Gangs are a problem, but I do not agree with the punitive measures people are wanting to be able to reduce it. I absolutely agree that crime is an issue and it's growing, but that's because of policy. That's because of punitive measures, and we need to try and bring that down.
Yeah. We'll move on to Ricardo Mendes March while Laura sorts out her connection.
Yes.
All of us deserve to be treated with respect and dignity no matter where our mental health is at. And I think this is really significant because for quite some time, in our communities and through our systems built by political decisions, that hasn't been the case. And I want to make it to the 11,000 people who are subjected to compulsory care every year, their whānau and their communities, and everybody who has contributed to the political process that has led us to this day where we are debating the Mental Health Bill, which will seek to overhaul the Mental Health Compulsory Assessment and Treatment Act of 1992. Even though that bill is quite old and would have been seen as progressive at the time, it has now been really well documented about how it's actually quite out of date and doesn't reflect the rights that we aim to uphold for disabled people. And most recently, we had He Ara Oranga, the report on the government's inquiry into mental health and addiction, that called for our Mental Health Act to be overhauled with a human rights-centered approach. And I want to acknowledge the minister's intent in here to do that and to actually uphold the voices of people who have contributed to this process to this day. But also, if we look at the same report, I think the findings of the report also identify that in order for this bill to be successful, the minister and the government, more broadly, will need to take an all-systems approach to improving the well-being of our communities. It will rely on addressing workforce issues, and it will rely on addressing the social and economic determinants of health. That very same report talk about how poverty was a huge contributor to people's mental health. And therefore, I think in order to address some of those rights-based approach, we'll need to look also outside of the scope of this bill, and that will be key for it to be a success. I also want to acknowledge the Abuse and State Care Inquiry, which brought and shed another light into the practices such as compulsory care and how they have often been used under the guise of care by the state. And I think this is another reflection that we need to take into account as we honor the voices of survivors and people with state care experience. The Green Party, though, notices that this legislation will deserve really, really strong scrutiny from us and our broader communities. And I also want to echo how we welcome the invitation from the Minister to get the Select Committee in charge of this bill to travel across the motu to adequately hear and take into account the voices of our communities who need to be at the centre of this bill. And so, again, we do aim to eliminate these restrictive practices that have been well documented, and call on the Minister to be a strong champion to address everything else that will need to be done to ensure that our people are safe. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to acknowledge in this legislation the particular, for example, need to address Māori mental health and take a te reti approach to mental health, that cannot be done if at the same time land continues to be dispossessed, people continue to be stripped out of their culture, if access to te reo Māori continues to be deprived, and those things are actually all connected. We have a bill that acknowledges the importance of Māori mental health and te reti o Waitangi, and therefore I call on the Minister that alongside this bill, which I really commend his good faith approach, he also becomes a champion to address the critical feedback we have received across so many reports, across so many events, and from so many community members on the need to address all the other parts of the mental health system that goes beyond this bill. We look forward to participating in the Select Committee process to adequately look if any amendments need to be made to strengthen this legislation and to encourage members of our communities to submit. I also want to acknowledge that when people have lived experience in the mental health system, particularly when it comes to issues around compulsory care, that there are barriers to participate in processes like the Select Committee. And so I hope that we take an accessible approach to ensure that we take care to what could be re-traumatizing experiences that are yet to be shared. And I look forward to working constructively. And I know Huhana Linden, who will be repping us in that Select Committee, will be a strong champion to ensure that we take really good care in upholding those voices in a way that doesn't re-traumatize people.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, yeah. You've moved around a bit, but I'm sure the new home can work.
Okay, I was just checking. All right. Huhana, if you've got any commentary on that.
Well, I guess I was actually reading some of the comments here, and they're right. Desperate people do desperate things. Now, I worked along with Auckland Action Against Poverty kind of on the outside, but utilised a lot of their work. Last time National were in, we had a crisis of homelessness we hadn't seen in a long time. And when Labour got in, that finally started to reduce. But the Welfare Expert Advisory Report group was formed. We went around the streets, right? And prior to that, my partner and I, we gave out backpacks out of our own pockets, and we handed them out to the homeless, full of clothing, proteins, all that sort of stuff. And one of the things that really annoyed me was when Peter Dunn legalised synthetic cannabis. And everyone goes into a panic over cannabis. Oh my God, it's the demon. Well, actually, alcohol is the biggest problem. But I would go on the way to court, and I often had these young guys come up to me, absolutely broken. 2 or 3 of their friends had died the night before from it. Now, that is desperation, okay? Mental health comes from that, and they don't recover from synthetic cannabis mental health psychoses. You do not recover. That's the reality.
Synthetic cannabis is some nasty stuff.
It's not even cannabis. Let's say it what it is. It's a scientific, synthetic, lab-grown grass that you can, smoke, and you get sick. And this has compounded over the years. Then we got COVID. We've come to this position now. It is so important that we look at our mental health. It does need upgrading, but when it comes to people with disabilities, they've removed our ministry. They've given us record cuts. They've actually now removed certain funding for autistic people. Fetal alcohol isn't included. The problem we have is this inequity between support services, whether you're mental health, whether you're deaf, or whether you're disabled. If you are under 18, you're under Ministry of Education. If you're over 18, over 65, you're under aged care, DHBs, or the old DHBs. If you're in the middle there, you come under ACC, Ministry of Health, or DHB, or you get nothing. None of them are equal. All of them have different criteria. And all the autistics, the fetal alcohol, and people with other forms of conditions that aren't deemed mental health anymore are all pushed under disability, but it requires a different kind of approach to how care should be given it's not the traditional type of disability, that disability funded. So, the Mental Health Act is one part of it, but we need to look at resourcing. I guess that's my ADHD way of coming back to the topic.
You're doing the weave.
Yeah, it's a weave. It just weaves in. It makes sense to ADHDers. It'll make sense to neurotypicals soon when they catch up. But we have about 5 topics going on in our heads 24/7. But the point is that resourcing is an issue across the board. Resourcing is the reason why mental health got a huge injection of funding, millions. And if they didn't give tax cuts to the multi-billionaires and the landlords, we probably would have had an adequate amount of funding for other kinds of disabilities. And we could have actually brought things together. This bill is seeking to redress some of the out-of-date stuff, but without the resourcing, it's a talk fest.
And the resourcing also refers to medications as well. Like a reason why a lot of those people end up on things like meth is because they can't get access to things like Ritalin. So,
absolutely, because speed works, and what kind of speed? You go, even actually a cup of coffee in the morning can help, but I don't drink coffee. I don't have caffeine, which is actually known to be a good helper for people.
Yeah, it's a good stimulant.
I do know from the 2021 lockdown, and as you probably remember, Huhana, the workplace I worked at, we went into overdrive, and I'm still on that caffeine addiction now from Raspberry V, because that was the one I ended up going to this day because of that particular lockdown, where I went from managing the deliveries on my own to managing 3 drivers and a quadrupled delivery structure. And like part of that job was, it wasn't just managing drivers, but it was having us going in half an hour apart from each other for the runs, work out the times, getting all that, and trying to make sure that every single step in the process. And if we were in the office, you had to be at, if one person was at the desk, and another person wanted to eat lunch, they had to eat lunch at the other end of the room, sort of thing. And it was just that whole process of and this was like trying to manage runs. If you spoke to the other 2 drivers, they were amazed how I got their car loads very accurate. But this is, running run sheets that, running runs that, are up to 100 kilometers long, all that sort of thing. And what helped me was those Raspberry Vs that just basically kept me going. And the reason why it was the Raspberry V that I ended up going to is because I won't do instant coffee. I will only do puncher or what's it called, espresso, because I run a coffee cart. And the fact is, we had a machine, but the machine was sitting in one of my vehicles out on the road of Kandala that didn't move for 4 weeks because of the lockdown. At that point I had 3 vehicles on the go, and I remember it was only one of them that was going out the day, and I remember the days off, I probably wouldn't have left the house because of the level restrictions.
Well, someone's got to drink the coffees during the lockdown.
Yeah, exactly. It was going to go off anyway.
Well, it was amazing how many trips I made to my coffee supplier's house in Te Horo to his letterbox to pick up stock. So, for me, that lockdown meant I could sit there. I had a great time in that lockdown. I could drive from Timaroa and Upper Hutt all the way to Rotoni and not get stopped at a traffic light. And anyone who knows that you normally stop at about 3 of those traffic lights on the way down.
Yep.
It was strange times, eh?
Oh, I know. It felt weird going through every single traffic light at 100 k's in 5th gear in there, and you just not even a car waiting to turn out of the roads. That was so weird. Hey, we now got Transmission Gully, so I don't know how things would have gone, but back then we didn't have Transmission Gully. So, yeah. Okay,
Dave's actually quite spot on, with his comments.
Which one?
Dave X.
Oh, look at that.
I'm really liking his comments. He's, and he's right.
Yeah.
The disability mental health funding is intentionally underfunded. I believe it is. Because if we look at our health system right now and the underfunding and the fact that it is multiple billions in debt, this is a deliberate attempt to privatize our health system.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now, why the heck are we doing this? Why can we not follow Finland, Ireland, and that with a proper tax structure that has a fairer approach to taxes, so
Profits
that
have
we
to be
can
made.
also benefit from free education, health, welfare, the whole lot.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happens when you elect the CEO to run your country. It gets run like a business.
And I'm still trying to figure out what happens when he balances the books, because the first thing he sat there and did was cut the price of taxation. That sat there and led to a lack of income coming in, which I don't know if any other businesses would normally do that as the first thing they do when they get into office. Or when the new CEO comes in, sits there and goes, we're going to slash 30-40% off our prices.
I know. I'm maybe I'm getting old, but I've never seen politics like we're seeing it globally. Although, to be honest, I grew up. I mean, I'm a boomer generation. I'll admit it. I'm 2 years before I became Gen X, and damn it, I missed
boomer.
out.
No.
I know, bloody boomers, mate. But I never
Yeah.
made the money or anything like that. But you know, I grew up with veterans. My auntie was a matron. World War II. My uncles were in there. One of them even filmed Hiroshima at the time. And, you know, the one thing that scares me is I grew up knowing the stories. I grew up hearing the history. People seem to have forgotten the run-up to World War II. People seem to have forgotten. I mean, we've got a eugenicist in power who's about to become Deputy Prime Minister and extend the Euthanasia Act to include disabled people.
Yeah.
Hello, Acteon T4. That was done to us in World War II. In fact, we led the way for the experiments around gassing and doing everything else. They worked on disabled first. They've now discovered that there were over 100,000 more disabled murdered by doctors at birth or in the hospitals than what they admitted to when they finally counted the numbers. There'll be more that we'll never know. But what people don't realise is this government is leading towards selling our country out to the highest bidder. But not only that, it's this whole issue around productivity. People who are productive should get free medication. Other people who are not productive shouldn't. That term productivity was used prior to World War II extensively. The demonisation of certain demographics is another thing that they did. These tactics are not new. It was all done in the 1930s. And we need to wake up.
Yeah. Oh, let's see what a member of the ACT Party, Laura Trask, says on the mental health bill.
I rise in support to represent the ACT Party in support of this bill at the first reading. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the work of the Minister, Matt Ducey, and congratulate him on bringing this bill to this House. Also want to acknowledge the collaborative approach that we have, because I think there are some things like this that kind of go beyond the political back and forward, to and froing, and it is such a serious piece of legislation, and I think it is really important that we all collaborate and get together and make sure we're on the same page with this. So I'd like to congratulate you on that, and also a bit of a shout out to the other people that are on the cross-party mental health group that we're working together with, and to the likes of those that will be on the Health Select Committee that will champion this bill through. So, the old legislation is 1992, more than 30 years old, and is no longer fit for purpose. I think that is more than obvious. This bill provides the guidelines for when a person can be subjected to compulsory mental health care without their consent. It provides a safety net for those who need urgent intervention as a last resort. It also defines legal protections and process for those individuals from the justice system requiring mental health care, ensuring a secure environment for treatment. This bill is about providing more effective care, supporting compulsory mental health care to be delivered in a way that minimises coercion and is responsive to individual needs. It sets out important guidelines to improve the effectiveness of the mental health and addiction support services in New Zealand, protecting patients and staff. The major areas of change. This bill aims to modernise the mental health care system while also driving a human rights-based framework for compulsory mental health care. Some of these main changes I note are that there's going to be a foundation for personal-centred care, including the ability for patients to make statements in regard to their future care, and it allows patients to specify the care that they consent to and do not consent to. And I think this is really important, and having this this plan in place before we head down that steps to needing that state intervention, I think would have a major difference in people's lives, and I really find that part to be one of the biggest features here that I really like to get behind. The aim is to minimise compulsory treatment. I do feel like that is quite an ambitious goal, and I see where the framework is heading with it. But at the same time, I think that we do need to realise that there is a fine balance between the safety of the individual, the safety of staff, and everybody that is involved in that care. But I do think it is ambitious, and I think it is something that can be worked towards. The legislation sets a new standard for when compulsory treatment can be used. The use of compulsory treatment can be only permitted when someone has seriously impaired mental health that causes severe adverse effects and they lack that decision-making capacity. Focusing on recovery and supported decision-making. Part 2 of the bill provides guidelines for supported decision-making to ensure individuals can make their own decisions regarding compulsory mental health where possible, which I think I talked about before, and this is a really, really important part to the bill. I also note that the inquiry, Hiara Oranga, a government inquiry into mental health and addiction, identified various issues, and a lot of these seem to be addressed from that report. Enhanced protections for children, specific provisions for forensic patients, cultural considerations, and a focus on reducing mental health and disparities. There are some potential unintended impacts, and I think I potentially spoke about that before. The goal of this bill is to support and protect patients' rights and improving mental health outcomes. However, this bill could create a complex web of new processes, meetings and administrative requirements that could actually delay the treatment for those that are in crisis, and that is something that I do actually worry about. I think that during the whole select committee process, we would like to see how these processes will be carried out, and we want to hear from the voices of those with that lived experience. So like the speakers before me, I do urge anybody that has that lived experience to please come forward with the select committee. Those that work in this area and those that feel like they have something to contribute. It is extremely important. This is a very important bill. I commend it to the House. Thank you.
So from one Laura to another, and for those that don't know my history, I used to be an ACT Party person. Now, and what I'm going to say is going to completely nuke the position that Laura just put forward, the other Laura, not this Laura. If you want to avoid a complex web of new processes and meetings and administrative requirements that could delay the treatments, increase resources. Yeah, get more resources. Increase funding. Okay, from one Laura to another. There you go, some free advice for you.
That might get
funding
stuck
for mental
with
health.
the Act part of, but there's no profit out of it.
I don't care. Health should not be for profit.
I agree. It's all about resourcing.
Yes.
You know, if he's worried about people getting there in time, well, how about funding our hospital system so ED doesn't have people dying or going psychotic within the bloody emergency waiting room?
Or try and have an appointment that a process that, like, I had a flatmate who went for it that should have taken 6 hours, took over 12 hours at Wellington Hospital, and they were having a quiet night.
Mm.
And
well, I waited 12 hours for an ambulance, and at midnight it arrived, and they wouldn't take me. So the next day I had to wheel in. I was rushed into immediately on oxygen. Our system's so screwed up and so behind the 8 ball. Do you know overseas they have ambulances where you can take your wheelchair? They laughed at me that night. They laughed at me, and I said, the wheelchair is my legs. If you take me without my wheelchair, I can't go.
Oh, the sick thing is that ACT will say, see, this is why we need private care. I'm like, no, this is why we need to increase funding to public health care.
I'm trying to think. There is ambulances in Wellington that take wheelchairs.
Yes.
I know, none in Auckland.
Oh.
Not where we were. And, it was scary. It was my first dose of COVID, and I couldn't breathe. And I waited 12 hours, 12 lunchtime till 12 midnight. They arrived just after. They laughed at me. They humiliated me. And in the end, I said, go. And I rang the doctor in the morning and said, get to that hospital now. I wheeled myself to hospital. I wasn't going to get anyone else sick, so I did that.
Yeah.
As soon as I arrived, they took one look at me. They were going to wait for the results. They got me straight up into zero neg, and then they told me my results, and that was positive. I got a shock because we did everything to protect my mate that was in hospital. They got that in hospital with visitors without masks. And that's how it happened. I walked into the zero neg in the isolation ward to a guy on the phone, someone visiting, who didn't wear a mask. Everyone was in PPE gear and masks everywhere. And the visitor was on the phone in an infectious ward with no mask. And I just can't fathom it,
Yeah, I mean,
it's crazy.
This is why I keep saying, okay, mental health especially should not be for profit. And that's because if you invest in mental health, you're going to get more productivity out of the country anyways. So it's for public interest's sake that you just have that publicly funded.
we start to create another problem if we. I mean, it's the analogy here is the Compass Catering taking over the school runs.
Oh,
Looks wonderful. Seymour looks sick taking a bite out of it. He looked like he was about
Yeah.
to go up. But hey, you know, $3 a kid. Who cares about the quality? But
Yeah.
it's the same thing. If you're going to deliver profit-driven care to people in need, you're not going to get well people.
That's
put
right.
it this way: as when I did Air Force experience, my ATC original experience was Ohakea. I remember when we went to Woodburn, the Compass Catering, the drinks machine was broken. When we went to Auckland, to Whenuapai, I'll get the name right because I do know that they merged Hobsonville and Whenuapai in one, but the Air Force, everyone still calls it Whenuapai. And only half the drinks machine slots were working. And that was Compass Catering. And here's the thing is, it was the only corps at the time of the Defence Force that actually had external catering because both the Army and the Navy still at that point had internal catering.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the case. I think the Navy is on the ships still, but I'm not sure about the Army is now. I mean, this was 15 years ago. This was back before, what do you call it, Hillsborough Road actually had, what do you call it, a motorway going underneath it, if that's really saying something. Yeah.
I didn't even know they existed that far back. I do know they've had issues around listeria, having horse meat overseas, using that. You know, it's just crazy that we go for the cheapest option. One of the biggest problems, I'm so old. I remember when all this changed. I remember my first vote was because I met Muldoon because Dad loved National. And I remember voting to make sure he didn't get back in. That was my first ever vote. And I remember we had a real social democracy as a type of governance for a long time. And then 1986, 88 came along. The mother of all budgets hit. Never recovered financially from that myself. And things changed and things have not come back the same. User pays was in the health system. Suddenly, things weren't being covered. Now, my district nurses that I see every fortnight say, we can't give you this, this, and this. You've got to buy it yourself. It's just ridiculous. You think mental health is going to work under private cover? It'll be,
No, it won't.
Genji's saying we've managed to medicate you beyond any ability to think for yourself. You're fine. We'll send you home. You know, it scares me because even I think there was recently a wife spoke about her husband. He'd gone to ED, mental health crisis. He was trying to commit suicide. They released him and he killed himself. You know, it's that simple. You do not take a suicide threat lightly, not for anybody. And if someone's in crisis and have a history of that, there needs to be somewhere to go, but they incredibly cannot do it. I've worked with the mental health crisis team when I've had to go out to deal with clients and stuff, and they don't want to take them. They do everything they can to find another way of doing it. And that's the scary part, you know. Unless we have the skilled people in those systems, we're losing them. And the GPs are the primary care level. If they can't care for someone, if you've got to wait 2 weeks and you're suicidal, do you think you're going to live 2 weeks?
Well, that takes me to a point. The National said that they wanted to train 500 mental health and addiction professionals each year, which is an increase of 17%. They're not going to be able to achieve that.
Well, I mean, they're not willing to. Yeah, they're not actually willing to increase the number of medical doctor students to sit there and go through New Zealand. Our medical doctor students are kept at 500. Yeah. I don't know how long that 500 figure's been in place for, but I think it's for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I trained when I was nursing, 1979. That's how far it goes back. So I had the old cap and white thing and those horrible pantyhose and stuff. But I remember very clearly how we were paid as we trained.
Yeah.
Now, why can we not? If we've got a shortage of people, right? Can we not at least pay them a minimum wage or an apprentice wage to work certain hours, build up the practical knowledge, which actually is missing? I've trained nurses right up until a couple of years ago, and health professionals. And the thing I find missing is that innate common sense that exists within the older nurses. You know, we learnt it on the ground. The matrons, they were the old World War II ones. They were tough as boots. Those
Yeah,
women.
they were. Yep.
Yeah, they were. But I'll tell you what, they were the best trainers I ever had.
Yep.
And they taught me a lot that I needed to know. And our rooms were spotless because we didn't have contracted cleaners leaving dust all over this place, causing infection. So why can't we go back to some of the basics and actually pick up what we do need? Have the polytechs for their segments, but put them on placement as soon as you can. They can do all the basic work that these nurses don't have time to do because they're so busy trying to deal with the clients. They haven't got time to toilet them, clean them, wash them, do all that other stuff. Why can we not have that kind of system in place again?
Actually, a good example of that. So my grandma's an ex-primary school and secondary school teacher and secondary school associate principal. She is very, both on her most recent admission and a previous admission to hospital, she was all good with the trainee people coming out. It was like, actually, come in and do it. You've got to learn in that, because she came from the generation where you passed on the knowledge to the next generation. And I mean, that was so common. I mean, it's part of the reason why Granddad retired at 58 when he was able to. Because this is when the pension age was still 60, and this was also because he's World War II vet. He retired to let people move up the ranks, and that just doesn't happen now because they just sit it there. And I mean, not so bad in New Zealand, but if you look at the United States, how Dianne Feinstein, who my grandma says needs to retire or she's going to die on the job, and guess what? Grandma was right. And Uncle Winston Peters, just take a look at what happened to Dianne Feinstein. Don't think about Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi. Look at Dianne. She died in office.
Dianne
died in office. Let's look at Tanya Yankovic.
First, in support of the mental health bill. And it is very much a welcomed piece of legislation. And as I was reading through it, it really did take me back to many individuals. In fact, I didn't realise how many I have walked through this compulsory care journey with. And it's not only obviously incredibly traumatic for them, but also for their family. And I really thought about the systemic family effects that happen when this process is happening. So, and I just want to acknowledge everyone out there who is struggling at the moment and their families. It is a very difficult road. So we really do welcome this legislation. Now, one of the things that I was very happy to see was the theme of our human rights being acknowledged so much in the process through the Act. It was mentioned quite a lot. I'm just going to touch on a couple of areas because I know we'll be able to speak a bit longer in the second and third readings. So I was really happy to see that, and that there is a focus on recovery, therapeutic support, not just a Band-Aid, but a long-term plan in order to help people transition from care to go back out into the community, from compulsory care to voluntary care. So it was really welcomed to see this approach of wanting to see a long-term solution for an individual, a holistic approach, one might say. Now, the other thing that I was also very happy to see was that everyone has a care plan. It is recorded and there is a review process. So there will be some accountability in this. And, processes, yes, hopefully they won't delay, but to have secure processes in place, anything to help save a life is worth it. So the more that we can do to do that, then the better. Now, minimising coercion, I was really happy to see that because of just witnessing some of the things that I have witnessed, and to encourage that this will not be something that will affect people's basic human right. There will be some leeway here, and to really ensure that things such as seclusion, as the Minister mentioned, it's not going to be used as much if possible. So that was a welcome thing. Safety. There was a mention, and I'll speak a little bit more in detail in the later readings, on children and young people. So there is a real look into that side of things as well. Now, I won't be on that select committee. It would be great to be on it, but I will follow it very closely. And I do welcome everyone, especially with lived experience, because that is how we will learn. And I would welcome everyone to participate as much as they can in the select committee process. I think that's all I want to say at the moment, Madam Speaker, and I commend this bill to the House.
Yeah. I'm glad she said she's not on the select committee, because I just found out she's a TERF. So I don't know what her idea of healthcare is going to look like, especially for transgender people. No, keep her away from that. Thank you.
Well, also she's apparently anti-vaccination.
Oh, okay. No, keep her the hell away from anything health related.
Yeah. Paul Barlow.
Cookers in the party. And
Yeah.
they're certainly showing themselves now.
Yeah, no, Paul Barlow has mentioned a lot about her it's she's one of the few who were of that fringe sort of thing that came up through New Zealand First at the last election.
We've already got one Turf Island. We don't need Turf Island 2.0 in New Zealand. No.
I think what concerns me, she talked about that it weaves human rights throughout the document. We've got an appointment actually of a transphobe now in the Human Rights Commission. And I've been involved with the commission for over 25 years as a human rights lawyer. I don't have a relationship with it right now. And it scares me. It scares me the direction they're going in because while I agree human rights should be in there, I don't see it as a significant human rights document, the mental health bill, the amendment to it. There are things that need to be implemented, but I see it as a well-being, health and well-being. But when you've got people proposing that's wonderful, it's got human rights in there, and then these are the very same people that will speak about out against certain demographics who are marginalised because of their identity, then I have to ask, where's their genuineness? I mean, pot calling kettle black, and that I'm sick of these politicians that play the good game, say the words, but don't actually put it behind what they don't act on what they say they do. She represents everybody in there. She does not represent just her demographics. All of them need to remember that some of their voters are part of the marginalised groups that they are now targeting. And they need to think again because they won't be getting back in if they keep behaving like that.
Let's hear from, was it Debbie Narua Packer?
Mihi to our Minister Matt Ducey, ka nui te mihi kia koe, he tino waka nui tēnei pere. And I want to first of all acknowledge this bill. It's the first under this new government to promote te tiriti o Waitangi, and the ceiling hasn't fallen in. It recognises and protects our tino rangatiratanga. And this bill also seeks to promote the decision-making capacity of our people in care, supporting their mana motahaki. Ka nui te mihi, ka nui te mihi, ka nui te mihi kia koe. What it also does is accepting the recommendations from Hiara Oranga, the report of the Government Inquiry into Mental Health. And I do want to mihi to many of the esteemed members, Professor Ron Patterson, who is the chair, Ta Mason Drury, founder of Te Pāti Māori, Dr. Barbara Disley, Dean Langihuna, Dr. Jemima Tiatia Seth, and Josiah Tualahi Malahi Arohatu. 5,200 submissions were made, 400 meetings were held with tangata whaiora, their families and members of the public, health and other service providers, iwi and kaupapa Māori providers, many community experts. And I guess what we are seeing is most significantly the shift away from a system that has harmed many in our community. So our current mental health framework has completely failed our communities and many communities. And I think going towards acknowledging te tiriti will benefit all of our mokopuna. The status quo system, as you know, has required a real shift from anything that has been done before, and we respect that this is the intent. One of the things that also is emphasising is the well-being of the communities and the people-first approach. And it is so humbling to be able to be in the House to mihi to you for that. This is what Māori input looks like. And no one has had their skin ripped off their bones. What input is also required to radically shift from what has been failing our whole communities. It's been informed by experts, well-versed experts. It's been informed by whānau who are living and challenged with a revolting aspect of how the mental health system has led us down. And it's been afforded, as including te tiriti, to ensure that we are all able to thrive. So I guess it's difficult not to reflect on the anti-Māori agenda and ignoring things that have been affected in the last 10, 11 months. And I'm sad to see that it's taken nearly a year for us to get to a bill that is acknowledging the deprivation, most significantly the depth of change that's required. One of the things that I want to do, so I do mihi to Hiara Oranga and the boldness of the Minister for taking this once-in-a-generation opportunity for change. Our own Ta Mason Drury pioneered for Māori health, citing in his Māori model of health, Te Whare Tapapa, that our mental health is as equally important as our physical health, our spiritual health, and the wider health of our whānau and our whole community. One of the aspects also that I'd like to mihi to in this particular bill is that what we have is I guess, sadly, when we see Māori are disproportionately represented, that we have the boldness within us across all parties to be able to look at repealing and putting in place something that, as we've heard before, that reflects our human rights-based approach, that is promoting and supporting decision-making that aligns with a whole wellbeing model of mental health, and it's providing measures to minimise compulsory or coercive treatments. It's been a long time coming, and we look forward to hearing the submissions and following this through to the third reading. Kia ora.
Oh.
Now that sounds so Debbie.
That is Debbie, and I appreciate the fact one thing that I will refuse to apologise for is sometimes I make people uncomfortable with the things I say, publicly, whatever. And it's important to make people uncomfortable. It's important to feel uncomfortable ourselves, because that's how we come to debate, court it all of that. What we've lost in our communities is the ability to be uncomfortable and to continue to have those debates respectfully. And so it's hard, because every time you bring up the word Māori, we start seeing attacks. People start going, that's your wind stamp.
People get reactive.
All this sort of crap. And I'm tired of it. I'm Māori and I'm proud. And I'm Navajo, I'm Aboriginal, and I'm Sami, and I'm proud. And you are who you are. You can be proud. You as well. We don't need to get into rhetorics that are bad, but the reality remains. And Eduardo Duran, a Native American psychologist, outlined it as multi-generational PTSD. Epigenetics as well plays a part of that. So it's built in. Trauma is multi-generational. We see it. I see it in whānau. We've got it in my own whānau with adoption, having ripped our whānau apart. And bringing everyone back together has been painful. But that's the reality, and that's what leads into mental health for Māori predominantly, is the issue of colonisation, the issue of trauma, losing our language, losing our land. All the things that people are angry about at the moment is the reality. If that is not addressed through tino rangatiratanga and the ability to have our own processes around healing under the Mental Health Act, then it's no good to us.
The loss of autonomy as well.
Yeah, well, you can't heal if you aren't dealing with the issues in the culturally appropriate manner. Many of them have actually lost access to their culture, and that's what breaks them up. And I remember the Nia Glassy case, a really horrific case in Rotorua, that poor wee girl. But when you delved into the abusers and their life histories, it's little wonder she had no chance in life. What was done to them was as horrific, but they thought it was normal. So they thought it was funny to do what they did to her. And then the iwi turned around and said, the leaders said, we failed one of our own people. We failed them. So they were going to make a bigger effort. But it goes beyond iwi doing it. We need to do it to our own people, but we need resources. We need the experts. We need the follower, and we need to follow through and resolve the issues that we've got that are outstanding. Did you know that 11% more disabled died of COVID and still dying at a higher rate than any other demographic in this country? Disabled. Did you know that Māori disabled are the highest number within that number of disabled? Also, if we look at our stats, we're looking at the fact that Māori from the age of 40, 67% have a disability of some kind through poverty, mental health, through childhood diseases. All of that is
through the labouring jobs they worked as well.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, even worse in those regards. And yet we're told to make our systems race generalized. Don't bring in the race about it. And yet the contradiction is that when they say about the greatest need, it's actually that group that has the greatest need. And so if you don't bring race into it, you're actually not going to capture that group. I know, because I've done the research around these groups. I've actually interviewed them for disabled Māori and found they will not go to hospital. They will not go in. I'm terrified of hospital now. It's more likely to kill me in the next 2 years than save my life. That's how dangerous it is. My doctor and I have a contingency plan.
I had something mentioned here from a friend of mine. Now, the person commented on my personal Facebook page, hence why it's not showing up in our chat column here, but was said, had a colleague that collapsed at work who couldn't be moved, but St John's told us to get him to a hospital. Now, I don't know where the location of that happened, but Palmerston Hospital, which I think is the nearest, is over a freaking hill.
Yep, it is over a hill. But yeah, to respond to Huhana, what is often good for tangata whenua is also good for Pākehā and Tauiwi.
Yes.
Like Pākehā and Tauiwi can also access those resources that are developed for Māori. Like a Māori doctor's not going to turn away a Pākehā or a Tauiwi.
Well, the evidence to that is with ACC now funding rongoa Māori medicine treatments, and guess who are the biggest demographic that are using it? Pākehā.
Yeah.
It's also like that with certain acupuncture.
Yes.
It's like it's not the demographic like because acupuncture is a traditional Eastern medicine.
Yep.
And that's not the group that's using it. It's the Western ones that are using it because they don't want the pharmaceutical approach.
Yeah. They want what is offered, which is a natural way. I mean, it wouldn't be too hard to re-indigenize our health system if we just got off our bums and did it. But, and it takes, everyone benefits from the most marginalized, the most in need group. Like with disabled, if you made all housing plans LifeMark standard, prepared for future needs, you would actually have cheap refits, and it suits overall because cradle to the grave, it makes sense. But we don't do that because it doesn't look pretty.
Well, I do know GJ Gardner's had the first it was the first person that ever dealt with being wheelchair accessible was Tony's place in Hamilton, and and it was like, we've never done this before, but they were like, but we want the challenge. And it is a template now that they actually have for other disabled focused houses. But I mean, his situation made that achievable. I mean, I know you probably don't quite have the same, same fortunate circumstances that he had that led him to be able to get that house built.
Oh, look, I'd love to own a home. I know exactly. I can't. I'm a foodie. My birth father was a chef. He was an artist. I found out later that I love doing all of that too. And I love cooking, but I can't cook. I haven't been able to cook for the last 5 years because the kitchens, they promised me. We moved in here 2 years ago and they promised me they were going to do an area of the kitchen so I could actually do my own cooking.
Yeah.
They didn't do it. They changed their minds. They said it cost too much. So they refused to do it after I'd agreed with them. And that's the thing. I mean, people have died waiting for modifications. A blind woman I know, beautiful person, she was already blind, type 1 diabetic, had been blind for a number of years, but she had to have a leg amputated. It got amputated, but she was left stuck in the house because there were steps to get in and out. The doors weren't wide enough. She died waiting, trying to access, I just can't fathom how society doesn't see that disabled people are a part of this society. I mean, every public holiday, every weekend, there's no trains. I'm stuck at home every single time.
And then you have the people who don't do it go, but Huhana, you can catch a wheelchair taxi, and it's like, but is that actual service available? Now, I'm not sure how Auckland is, but in Wellington, you can't get a wheelchair taxi.
I got told it takes 2 weeks. You have to book 2 weeks in advance for Wellington. But that's because Dean, who used to run Wellington airport shuttles that were accessible, it was his taxi. He was looking for help during the COVID times, and no one would help him, and he just couldn't continue. Yeah. And as a result, we lost all of that. But in Auckland, we tried. I was nominated for a Māori award thing one night, and we stayed at the quarters, got flashed at a staycation. Went to book the taxis, not one. The concierge tried 10 taxi companies. Not one of them were available after 5 p.m. It's happened to me at the hospital when they wanted to get me home. I said, you better ring before 5, and they didn't, and I couldn't get home. So, I had to wheel myself home in the dark with all my suitcases, and I was still sick. So, this is the ridiculous nature of our country. And we have no politician in power that sits there for our voice to be heard. We have lost our ministry. We are losing our CEO, the first disabled CEO in the country that had a disability. And they underfunded that ministry from day one. This is not just this coalition's fault. Let's not lay it on there. This is a collection of politicians that have never wanted disabled people to have their own ministry. I know that for a fact. And they were forced after I did the Hickey of Hope. As a result, they turned around and punished us by underfunding that ministry.
Mm.
In the partnership agreement, we had this most unique way of doing it: deaf name, a Māori name, and the Pākehā name, English name. They've taken the Māori name out, the sign language name's gone, and now it's no longer a ministry. Why? Yeah, they were struggling because it was underfunded.
Yeah.
Paula tried to get the ministers, Simmons, Upston, to listen. None of them did. So then they punished us, cut our budgets, cut out autism funding, the whole lot. And we will remain punished until we get a change of government. You know, like little children.
Yeah,
I think I need it.
I'm going to say something that it's going to sound libertarian-pilled, and that's because I am a libertarian. But taxation without representation is theft. And if you've got people that are taking your taxes and not investing it into things like public health, they are stealing your money.
They are.
Let's just be honest. Like, Luxon is taking your money and using it to fund himself. And it's like, no, bro, you need to put that money back into public health that benefits everyone.
Yeah.
They've got private health insurance. They don't need it.
I know.
You know, this is the thing that I find so sick. I think I love my country. I love it dearly. I try, you know, I live with depression too. Do you know how hard it's been to try and lift up during these times when all you're getting is attack on you because you're Māori, attack on you because you're disabled, attack on you because I'm about to be a senior. You know, and I am a teenager, already am, but I'm about to hit the old over 65 bit where I will lose my funding and have to start all over again. And I might be lucky if they don't reclassify me like they did with another friend. After 20 years of being disabled, she's now got a health condition and they've refused her all disability funding, the whole lot. This is what they're doing. They also said they weren't going to harass people on job seeker sickness and supported living payments. I spent in March this year an hour and a half answering the same question at the office. In the end, the poor case manager was behind her shaking her head. In the end, I looked at her because I had a medical doctor with me who asked her the same question, why. She's answered it. And then I turned around and I said to them, look, I'm stopping the meeting. Send me the questions by email and I'll bring a lawyer with me to the next meeting because I'm concerned that what you're doing is manipulating it to make it look good so you can cut my funding.
Yeah.
I haven't heard from them since. Maybe that's because I am a lawyer and I can talk my way out of things. But that, I mean, I find that funny for me, but I really am worried about all the disabled going through that service.
Especially when the working income who can't even sit down there and follow the same set of rule books. Like, that's the part that gets me, like, you know, I mean, I haven't had the disabled aspect, but like literally like having a procedure that should be uniformed and is uniformed in the law being applied so Mickey Mouse and the part, like I remember one time having a debt incorrectly created. It took me 5 attempts to get the answer and every single time go, I can assure you there's no fraud being created. And I had to go back, I can assure there's fraud being created. So I'm not going to give the information that would alleviate the clients who's questioning it. So then the client still questions and still thinks there's fraud being created while being told they're not. So give me the information or sit down there and do it. Stop assuring me it's right while withholding the information that I can assure you it's right. It is no point telling me it's standard policy to break the law.
I'll give you a scenario. I actually did a cartoon about it a few years ago. I had a client, right? We go in. Now, she's in a wheelchair. She has seizures. She's in residential care, but she's in her 30s, or this is a while ago. And she was legally blind. They went in there and they turned around and said to her, we've got a job for a courier. We can get you your driver's license. I'm sitting there, right? Pointed out to them that she's blind. And she turned around and said to my client, well, you're just being lazy, aren't you? You don't want a job. Epileptic. She's not allowed to drive by law. She's an unstable epileptic, need 24/7 care. And that was the response. Well, that got changed when I spoke to the manager. But this isn't the first time. I got a found.
They did that to John Murphy at Winslow Inn.
Well, I mean, it's this is the thing. I mean, when we did the welfare report, it was scary. The homeless in Wellington told us quite clearly that they don't get a benefit because they're too terrified of walking into WINS. And I'm well aware that there's quite a few people out there that are so scared of WINS that they live off their family because that's the only income they can get, and they can't manage their lives because they have severe anxiety to the point it's gotten worse over the years.
Well, actually, I can tell you this. I've got a delivery to an MSD workplace that I'm actually saying I will not personally deliver to.
Yeah.
Because I don't, the amount of crap I've had from WINS, the threats to call security because, the beneficiary is always wrong, even when the law says they're right, having to threaten the High Court judge to, taking it to the High Court and sitting there and going, well, your answer's not acceptable to me. Are you prepared to say it to a High Court? I'm not taking it. Well, do I have to go to a High Court? I see that as threatening behaviour. I go, well, put it this way. If it was Judge Judy, she'll be sitting there calling you an idiot. And they go, I don't appreciate your time. I go, I'm sorry for saying that Judge Judy will call you an idiot because that's what you're doing.
Hey, don't care about feelings.
Commit perjury and go to jail for 4 years to sit there and batter for, to sit because your morals and prides are going on that one. The person didn't even know what perjury was, and I said that's called lying under oath. At the moment, you are withholding information I'm legally required to. And are you going to then go, but I'm allowed to withhold information I'm legally required to in front of a judge? A judge ain't going to sit there and take the crap. I'm not taking the crap, and you're becoming bully boy behaviour. If you take that to a judge, you can be held in contempt. Mm-hmm. Well, a quick phone call to the supervisor, and oh boy, there's an apology and getting shit done. But, some of us hold our cool. Other people end up with guns like they did in Ashburton.
There's a conference in November. I'm actually a keynote for it, Poverty by Design. I've been thinking about it lately. And I had a homeless person under the last national government. Now, we rescued her from a violent partner, rescued her and her kids, right?
Yeah.
But she had nothing. So I took her to my WINS office here, and I knew the manager through the WEAG stuff. And he comes up to me and goes, what's the situation? So I filled him in. He said, okay, how much does she need? She had a baby and nappies and stuff, and he thought that out. So that was fine.
Yeah.
Then she had to, calm your blood pressure there, bro. Then she was fine. And then she had to, needed to get a house, need to get a home. So we booked in to see the housing person. And I nearly dropped. This was their new rules. My jaw dropped, and I just looked at her. I said, we're leaving right now. And he just turned around and said to her, oh, you chose to leave, eh? You can stay with him.
I've had that from WINS.
I'm not going to assess you for the house. You don't qualify. So I contacted Marama Fox at the time because she was the minister. She was good. She helped me rescue quite a few disabled that were being evicted and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, I got a meeting with the manager. The manager apologised. We had another interview with a woman. The guy kept staring at us all through, the one that declined it. And this woman did the interview and she qualified. So by design, that government and this one are fudging things to suit their agendas.
Oh, yeah.
There's no genuine attempt to get the wait list for people needing housing, because if they did that, they would find that there's thousands out there, while there's 100,000 houses sitting empty around New Zealand for land banking.
Yeah.
So, we've got over 45,000 people needing homes. There are homes, but there are people holding money through the homes by just land banking. And those are some of the issues. Now, how is someone with mental health going to cope going into WINS, which look at you like you're a criminal, and then you're dealing with your own anxieties, depression, fears, and you want to apply for a house, you don't qualify, so they put you in emergency housing or in a rat-infested hostel, and then they expect you to cope. It's not on. There's all of these issues come right back to that same bill. Unless you resource properly, unless you provide the right supports. Not everyone is a David Seymour that got funded through Atlas and everything else and has had the privilege of his life, has never really worked in a real job. Or his little sidekick, Brooke, that looks at him with lovey-dovey eyes every time she sees him in Parliament. That the privilege they hold is disgusting.
Yeah.
But they are lauding it because they don't understand. Not everyone has an agenda of becoming a multimillionaire. Not everyone wants the riches of the rest of the world. Most people just want a quiet, normal life of being able to have the opportunities, etc. No one wants to be on a benefit. And the few that abuse it, it's less than 1%. We have more corporate fraudsters than we do in the WIN system. And I had to deal with one tetraplegic where they created the debt by allowing the ex to be there and care for her. Now, housing did that, welfare did that, and ACC did that. Then, when he got her pregnant against her will, she's a tetraplegic, can't move, can't fight.
Yep.
They turned around and blamed her, accused her of fraud, left her with a $250,000 debt, and they almost wheeled her out onto the street to leave her there in the hospital bed. That is what I was dealing with 10 years ago by that last government. I don't want to deal with that again. I can't deal with it anymore.
Yeah. And that is something that, I mean, I've noticed at WINS. It is commonly you're wrong even when you're right sort of mentality. And it's like, I remember one time where they made a address screw up. So I have a PO box. The reason why I have a PO box for all my mail is so that if my former flatmate James, who was an epileptic, who didn't sit down there and eat properly, that led to a lot of his problems, I don't want him going through people's letterboxes to go for that. On 2 different occasions where I've moved houses, Work and Income have deliberately removed my PO box. I don't see what the problem is. The last time they did that, it was at the same point where he discovered approximately where I was living in Newtown, and I know his normal behaviour was to go through looking through letterboxes. And what did they do? They sent my community services card through the mail. And it got delivered to the wrong address. They have decided not to resolve the complaint the second time round. They can't understand why it's led to me having to move houses. I mean, it was a multitude of issues that had to lead me to move out of that house, but they contributed to it, and they go, but that was a choice. It's like, you guys got to take responsibility, And they talk about personal responsibility. They go, personal responsibility is a two-way street. Who was the person who removed the address? And it's like it's constantly the blame game. But doing it, it's like, but this is 2.5 years ago. I don't see why it's still a problem. I go, because he hasn't exactly gotten over what has happened. Like, I got sent he was a straight man, sexually explicit text messages about gay sex. It was horrible.
Yeah.
But here's the thing is, if you're an abuser, Work and Income would sit there and back the abuser than the abused every single time.
Oh, absolutely. I had that with clients too.
Yeah, it's like, an abuser at Work and Income, they will breach protection order.
I know.
Allow to hide and subvert evidence that would breach protection orders.
I know. It's not new. I mean, we need basically bring in the universal
basic income. Yeah.
Income. Yeah. It works.
We're at that point.
Well, it works in those countries like Finland and that. If you've got the basic costs covered, then working on top of that is a bonus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everyone gets it. It's universal. So people go, we can't afford it. Well, we actually could. The more money circulating within our country, the more people spend.
Oh, I mean, we did it during COVID.
Yeah, well, people spent. It did. People spent. I mean, if they'd had Uber delivery, I think people would have lived on Ubers for those weeks.
Yeah.
But people spend. And, if you haven't got the money to spend, well, people are stealing, desperate ends. If you're hungry, what are you going to do? You're going to let your kids starve, or you're going to take the risk? And that's now that the food banks are closing, I fear for things. I mean, we've got our own garden. We are now setting up a bigger garden. I can't, but I've got people in to help. we are setting up a bigger garden because we've got nieces, nephews, mokopuna that we want to support. And we also want to try and teach them how to manage on the basics. I was raised by adoptive parents. My adoptive mum went through the Depression. That's how old they were. And, 1920s, mate. I mean, this is not something I would think most young people would know about. She was frugal. She taught us everything, how to bottle, how to grow, how to manage on things, how they got the cheapest meats, or they get a beast and they cut it all up and did all that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're doing everything we can to cut down.
There's a common misconception that beneficiaries don't know how to manage money, and I've seen the complete opposite. A lot of beneficiaries know how to find
They know how to manage money down to the last cent.
Yep.
If you've got a 300 or 400 a week coming in, and your rent's 550, it's no amount of budget's going to help that one.
No, exactly. We'll get to the most important part of the Freshwaters Management and Other Matters Amendment Bill, where Penny Simmons basically has a bit of a stir up from two Dunedin MPs.
Thank you for clarifying then just now that part 1 is from clause 4 to clause 26, or 27 even. Now, why this is important, and this includes Schedule 1 as well, and part 1, part 2 is Schedule 2 and some smaller clauses, is that we've had a number of amendment papers lodged this morning from the Minister, the Honourable Chris Bishop, and they are very significant changes, and they will be in this part 1 debate along with Schedule 1. So I think it's most important to start with this, with my contribution now, but I do want to then work through all of the clauses because, Mr. Chair, this bill does a number of things. Most of what it does is in relation to a whole number of resource management secondary legislation, so national policy statements and also regulations. So that is why the bill works in its way. And we just heard a different minister in question time outline some of the different things that it does. And one of those things is to do with the national policy for freshwater management, and we see that straight up at clause 4 in interpretation. But I don't want to talk on that yet, because what I want to start my contribution about is the outrageous process that we have seen on this bill, both this morning and I guess 2 weeks ago when the Select Committee report came out. And Mr. Chair, this is quite a technical bill, and as I said, it changes secondary legislation and also changes how future secondary legislation is made. Those are the main amendments to the actual Act itself, the Resource Management Act. And they were what was consulted on in a shortened time frame and what most submitters submitted on. However, some submitters opened up the process and wanted to talk about discharge consents and an inability sometimes to get them because of some High Court action or some court action. And so what ministers must have done is spoken to the government members in the Select Committee, and the Select Committee then recommended some changes to 107. And it's very important to note, and I'll talk about them more substantively later, but those changes to section 107 and regarding discharge consents were not in the bill as it was introduced, and most people did not make submissions on them. Importantly, some organisations were allowed to make submissions on them, and other organisations, such as Forest and Bird, who have written to the Speaker to complain about this issue, were not allowed to submit on this issue that wasn't in the bill when it was introduced, presumably because the Chair thought it was out of scope. And it is out of scope, yet somehow it's in this bill as reported back today. But then, that is not all, Mr. Chair. Then, this morning, we have 2 more amendments from the government, from the Minister, Chris Bishop. One of them seems to be specifically directed at the Otago Regional Council that is planning to meet tomorrow to notify its freshwater plan. And this amendment is to say, no, Otago Regional Council, democratically elected council that has been working on this for a long, long time, no, you cannot notify that plan tomorrow. This is shameful, and I know many members will have more to say on that. I'm just introducing, at the moment, these terrible changes. And then we heard as well in the question just before about another amendment that is to do with farm plans and pausing those farm plans. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, we have not had time to go through what that means. We haven't had submissions on the importance of the changes to 107, and it is a disgrace. And I will leave it there for this contribution before going through the issues more systematically, but I invite the Minister to try and explain why this urgency is needed.
Ingrid Leary.
If I may, Mr Chair, I would just like to pick up and extrapolate on the introductory comments from my colleague, the Honourable Rachel Brooking, to provide those who are watching this with some context, because there is indeed scheduled to be a large public meeting in Otago, which would have been at the Otago Regional Council offices normally, but had moved to a public venue that was much bigger, the Hutton Theatre, so that people could watch the vote take place. That this amendment that my colleague referred to, just tabled today, with no input on the Select Committee, refers to. And so there is a huge deal of public interest in the Otago region, and what we are contending is not only is it anti-democratic because submitters have not had an opportunity to look at the amendment and to submit on it, but the actions of the government to intervene in a matter of local democracy with a locally elected council is a gross overreach. And it is no surprise to me to see that in another council, the Wellington Council, we have similarly seen perceptions or a kind of manufactured story of chaos that doesn't meet any kind of threshold where there is an overreach by the executive. And for context, Mr Chair, the councillors who were democratically elected have been looking at this issue not only this term but for many, many years, and have done extensive consultation on the Freshwater Plan to the tune of 18 million ratepayer dollars. There is a 7-to-5 split in the council in favour of notifying based on the public submissions and the democratic process that has been followed. And I have said to the Minister publicly in the newspaper many times, I think that she needs to stay in her lane, because the ramifications of overreaching every time there is a disagreement with a democratically elected local council are huge for our institutions of democracy. Now, some more context is that earlier this month I submitted a number of Official Information Act requests and a number of the equivalent requests, Lagoimas, to the Otago Regional Council. And when it transpired that the councillors received these, some of those who may have been the subject of having to declare that they had direct communications into government ministers unilaterally then informed the Otago Daily Times and said yes, they had actually written to the Minister to ask her to intervene. My question is or my perception is that would not have been transparent had it not been for the actions that I took. And my instinct all along has been that this government would continue to apply pressure, continue to use tactics via the minority on the Otago Regional Council, and if it didn't get its way would overreach, which is what we're seeing today. The tactics I refer to are special meetings being called and urgent resolutions to vote on the notification, knowing by the minority group who don't want to notify, knowing that they would lose a vote, but trying to create some kind of drama that government ministers could then allude to as chaotic or as shambolic. And in fact, there were ministers of the government quoted on the radio referring to the council as a rogue council. So I'm providing you this context, Mr Chair, because we have not had a chance to hear this in Select Committee. This amendment has just been dropped after the Select Committee process. And I think it's really important for people who are watching the debate to understand the context and to understand that this specific amendment, it may have ramifications for other councils, but is specifically engineered to take that vote away from the council tomorrow and to legislate over the council so that the government can get its way. Now, that is not transparent. It shows there has been an agenda. I believe that ministers have been in cahoots with the minority group of councillors, and I'm really looking forward to seeing in the fullness of time the results of my Official Information Act and Lagoima request based on evidence and information that I have from many sources around the region, which would suggest that there is a very cosy and inappropriate relationship. So I'm going to end my contribution there and seek a call for Honourable Rachel Brooking to continue, but I just thought that was really important.
Okay. I think that is a very important thing to have said tonight.
Yep. It's horrible what this government's done.
Yeah, it's basically, if you don't do it our way, we're going to step in.
They're acting, this is typical of someone who only knows about being a CEO and not about governance. They've actually crossed the line. They're going into operational matters with local councils. I mean, you know, Wayne Brown, I mean, I don't love the dude. I mean, he's horrible. But even he is opposed to what they've been doing.
Yeah.
So
I never ever want to hear National call themselves a small government party. Never.
Oh, they're not.
This is everything that is against the idea of what a small government is.
Well, you know, the minute that they the minute they stepped into operational matters, like threatening the Wellington City Council and stuff, that is so wrong. If there was a judicial review done or the Ombudsman overviewed it, he would say that they've crossed the line.
If there's a lawyer out there who wants to go and do it, I think it is needed. If a lawyer wants to go through and file that case, and the thing is, the council doesn't have to initiate it. It can actually be done by a ratepayer.
Oh, yeah, it can be done by anybody.
Yeah.
You just ask the ombudsman to investigate, and the ombudsman can. It is a huge concern, not just over the water issues, but over many of these changes they're making, is that they're going into operational matters. And this, to the point that they've appointed Richard Prebble to the Waitangi Tribunal. I mean, for God's sake, the man hates the Waitangi Tribunal. He doesn't believe in any of these issues, and they brought him in. I mean, Hannah,
why can't they appoint him to the ferry replacement board? Or is that because the replacement options goes against his own agenda as the director of Main Freight wanting rail on the ferries?
Well, it could be. I don't know. But what I do know is that Hannah O'Regan and Derek Fox were doing their job. And everyone in there were doing their job. And I've got cases coming up in the tribunal that I'm actually the main claimant. And, the health claim, the phase 2 health claims, I don't want him making that. It's just, and the appointment process is so biased that I actually know I won't get reappointed to the Human Rights Review Tribunal. So after 14 years, I've actually retired from it. Because also I don't support this government's move away from human rights, which is what they're doing.
Yep.
And the
Party's
tribunal,
been terrible on human rights.
exactly. And we can't do
they want
nothing about it.
decommission.
They hate human rights in this country. They don't. Well, they only want the rights to make money, to sell our country, to sell our resources. That's what they want. Everything is about money, money, money. Human lives are more important. We began talking about the Mental Health Act. And out of that, it's far more important that our human rights are upheld, regardless. In the same way that I will support the fight for religions to have their own right to their own autonomy. I will support, the queer community, their own rights, disabled, the whole lot.
Yeah.
We don't have to agree on everything, but I'll certainly support their rights.
Yeah.
And the same with this Three Waters. That was so callously taken out.
I want to send every water bill to Groundswell. The misinformation they put out there.
That's a good analogy. But what saddens me is millions was poured into preparing and doing this work. They have wasted so much money. The ferries, the whole lot. They've wasted everything.
Yeah. I just got to wait for the day that I sit there and do an event in a blue area and see if the local MP tries to come up and be all cozy at the coffee cart.
Well, we've only got 1 year and 10 months to the next election. Not that I'm counting down, but I am. So,
It's all right. We've got to work out how to make It's in the Ballot actually work for the 2025 general election. No, 2026 general election, because we've got local bodies next year.
Yes.
But we've got to actually sit there and try and make sure that we can cover what will now become 71 electorates. I thought it was going to go up to 73, but
all I do know is that we need to encourage our communities to vote. We had a record 1.2 million non-voters this last election, so it wasn't a majority government. It's one that got in there because of all the different votes and the protest votes. But we had 400,000 more non-voters than we've ever had before. 800,000 is the norm. 1.2 million non-voters. We need to be pushing people to vote.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that is the thing is, how do we get them voting? Because, that last election was one of those ones of where there were a lot of people, it's just like, I'm getting a choice of shit, and shit.
People were exhausted, and I get it. We dealt with major. I mean, I give Jacinda huge credit because we dealt with the White Island explosion, dealt with the massacre, dealt with a measles outbreak, dealt with a pandemic, dealt with other major issues that I can't think at the moment. How many other prime ministers have dealt with those multiple amount of issues in such a short time span?
Not Luxon.
Survived.
Luxon's creating the shitstorm. Jacinda, she just got given one.
Was putting it out firsthand. I mean, the great example would be March 15th. She was all lined up to go ahead for something in the Taranaki, and instead she was on a plane down to Christchurch.
Yep.
Where was Luxon with Dunedin?
I don't know. He was probably fucking around in America, wherever the hell he was.
Yeah.
He's hardly in New Zealand. It's either Peters or actually they're all taking an awful lot of overseas trips at the moment. I wouldn't mind a bit of a ride on one, but not with them.
Yeah. Sit in the cargo department.
Okay, so let's get into the bills that are coming up that are closing soon for submissions. We've got the sentencing reform, amendment bill that closes on Tuesday. We've got the Armed Shootings Club Shootings Related Other Matters Amendment Bill closing, also coming up this Tuesday. We've got the District Court Judge Amendment Bill. I think this is where we need to put a submission to say that one's not enough and we actually need to raise the number by quite a fair bit. The Parliament Bill that closes on Wednesday, the 6th of November. And I think the representation review, I think we need to sit there and put into the standards with the Parliament Bill is to give all electorate MPs 2 electorate EAs, not one, because you're going to be soon having to deal with 70,000 constituents. And we'll be talking about this on tomorrow night's special show, the Auckland Harbour Board and Takapuna Borough Council Empowering Act Amendment Bill, which closes on November the 13th. And the Building Overseas Product Standards and Certifications, what was it called? It misses out half the words on their amendment bill. And that closes on the Thursday the 14th of November. So if you want to get your submissions out, start pinning some paper around.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Oh, yes. Well, we've got to sit there and know what's happening and see what's truncated select committee processes come up. Yeah. So for those who are watching, we are doing a Labour Day special tomorrow because our great friends at BHN are not doing the show. So we thought we'll sit there and there'll be those who'll be missing out on BHN. So we decided we'll do another order paper show. Tomorrow it will be focusing on now I'll just get the right run sheet up. Now the Citizenship Western Samoa Restoration and Amendment Bill, second reading, and the Auckland Harbour Board and Takapuna Borough Council Empowering Act Amendment Bill, first reading. So, as I say, there are some, it's a bit of a random special. So, I got to choose those shows, not leaving it out to the polls to vote. But and this week's coming up as a recess week. And the only bills that's under I think it's under select committee this week, I think is the Marine Coastal Amendment Bill, all submissions. That was the wrong one. Calendar. So oral submissions would be happening on Wednesday and Thursday with the Justice Committee over the Marine and Coastal Takatuta Moana Customary Marine and Title Amendment Bill, which for those who we can see here, this is the schedule for Sunday for those bills. So I think that might be next week's show.
All right.
Gonna sound a bit fun. So yeah, if we can somehow shoulder tap Tony to be in it because he's an expert in marine biology, if we can get him onto that particular show because we missed him last time.
Nice.
So,
I ended up wearing many hats on the show.
Oh, yes. Okay, so thank you for joining us for our loyal followers and a few new viewers from the Huhana Hickey Facebook page. Thank you for sitting there sharing that with your followers. I think they've been well introduced into the Order Paper podcast.
And I noticed one of my cousins was online, so that's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll make a move and we'll see our panelists have after-show chats and drinks, well, if you want to. And we'll see everyone back here tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Make sure you bring a friend or tag it a BHN follower or something like that, and hopefully get our views and our subscribers up. We're at 250 YouTube subscribers. If we get to 500, we can bring in super chats.
Woohoo!
Yeah, so have a good evening.
All right.
Thank you for watching the Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/It's in the Ballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Productions.